Welcome, everyone. I'm Steve Reynolds from Imagine Communications, and today we're going to be talking about how audiences are consuming media in new ways every day and how ST2110 makes that happen. I'm joined today by John Mailhot, the CTO at Imagine Communications, and Cassidy Phillips, the SVP of Solutions Architecture. Today, we're going to be covering SMPTE2110 and a lot of the aspects of that technology, talking about where it came from, how it's evolving, and some of the use cases that we see really being targeted well towards this media over IP standard. 2110 came onto the scene a couple of years ago. It was the work of a lot of bright people through the SMPTE organization. SMPTE was indeed the sponsor of that standard. And we're very lucky to have John Mailhot with us, who was actually the drafting chair for 2110. John, why don't you give us kind of a quick intro to what 2110 is and the problems that it was intended to solve?
Sure, Steve. I think SMPTE 2110 evolved actually from prior work in the Video Services Forum, TR03, and became 2110. The objective was to enable us to use IP networks to connect all the parts of a television facility, to get rid of the coax that we've relied on really since the 1940s and move into using the COTS and IP-based technologies to do the heavy lifting of connecting everything in a television facility. We also used the opportunity to unbundle the video and audio into separate streams so that everything could be separately switched and routed, which is, really important in production environments. It's sometimes in playout environments not as helpful, but it's still useful. And so we really looked at the broad spectrum of capabilities across the industry, including post, including production, including playout, and even distribution, to make sure that this could be one standard that served all these purposes. And I hope we achieved it. It certainly went well. The participation across the industry, both vendors and end customers together, led to, I think, a pretty good outcome.
Yeah, John, I think you have achieved many of those goals, and I definitely want to get into some of the details of that. But first, John mentioned the VSF, the Video Services Forum, which definitely played a key role in the formation of what we're talking about here today. Also want to make sure that people are aware of two other organizations. One of them is AMWA, and the other is AIMS. Those two alliances, those two organizations have really played a key role in continuing to advance what's happening with SMPTE 2110, and also doing a lot of work to document and foster the adoption of those standards as we move forward. So big thanks to the VSF, to AMWA, and to AIMS for the role that they've played in this standard. John, you in your preamble there, you mentioned that one of the key goals of 2110 was to move in the direction of off-the-shelf networking components, to really use some of the high performance, high capacity networking elements that had been developed for industries other than the media industry. What were some of the key drivers for that, and where do you feel like we've gotten in terms of really leveraging off-the-shelf hardware?
Well, thanks to you. The evolution of technology is sort of a fascinating topic in itself. And if you look at the television industry going back to the 1940s all the way to really maybe a couple of years ago, we were developing technology that was extremely specific to television. Think about all the taped formats and tape transports and tube-based cameras and tube-based displays. And, television really led that development. But starting, really maybe 15, 20 years ago, the computing industry began to develop technologies that could apply to television. And we saw this first in the video servers. When video servers replaced tape, it was an important development. And it wasn't because tape wasn't good. Tape was great, right? Tape was what we had for years. But the servers were able to deliver better picture quality, better reliability, none of that mechanical transport challenge that you had with tapes. And so our Nexio server line was one of the first industry examples of a fully software-based, computer-based video server. And to this day, that's been our flagship of how we do video file-based workflows, is all computer-based, using COTS parts and COTS motherboards and everything. Now, if you look around a television plant, the core infrastructure, the SDI, so to speak, it's like the last part of the plant that's not computer-based at this point and not IT-based. And the IT industry was very rapidly moving to higher and higher line, bandwidths. So in 2013, 2014, when this transition started, a 10 gig switch was kind of exotic. Now, 10 gig is 5 years ago. Now, Arista, Cisco, others are launching 400 gig products. 100 gig is kind of table stakes, and the old stuff is what you can pick up everywhere else. That transition is huge because now, a single 100 gig link can carry like 60 HD signals. That's just very different than one coax per channel, typical SDI footprint. And it plays out in how we develop systems, how we build plants. A 1 RU switch replaces a full rack sized SDI router these days.
Yeah, Cassidy, that kind of brings up an interesting question. I know a lot of people in the audience are going to be interested in how this transition from SDI towards IP is playing out in the designs that you and your team work on. And is it really a question of SDI or IP, or are you guys finding ways to make the two work together?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, our first systems had mostly 2110 as far as when this 2110 standard was finalized. We actually had systems where there were 2110 native cameras and everything. But from the very beginning, we knew that it wasn't just about allowing people to pick the best of breed devices within 2110. People are going to pick the best of breed device for their workflow, regardless of whether it's SDI or IP. Maybe it's even a compressed IP thing. So we've had to find a way to design systems that included all of those things so that a customer could continue to leverage whatever they have for whatever means they need into the next 10 years, maybe. So yes, we have new 2110 systems going in, but you might have an SDI production switcher or camera that needs to remain within that workflow for another 5 to 7 years. And I would say that we're now at most of the time, the core, to John's point, ends up being one of these COT switches, but the edge devices are really where the SDI or 2110 question marks lie. And it's just a matter of preference at that point.
Right. And that interoperation with SDI plants was a red letter requirement through the development of 2110.
Sure.
That we had to be able to go to and from and in between and maintain the investment that, customers aren't always in a position to update their cameras and switcher and every other piece of the plant all at once. In fact, that's pretty rare. So instead, it's how do I migrate forward to get the benefits of the IP-based solutions, but protect the investments I have that aren't really ready for a refresh this year?
It raises a lot of interesting operational and technical challenges, though, probably the biggest of which is the need for a hybrid operational control system. So Cassidy, what have we learned about that, and what direction is that moving in?
Yeah, so our control system allows you to make the whole system feel like one big router, even if you have a couple sub routers that are SDI and you have an IP core and all these things. And, that's really to John's team's credit that we, for the most part, we support everything we've ever supported, and we're adding new protocols and APIs all the time. So we can find a way to get along with whichever devices or routers someone needs us to interconnect with, and then present that on one router control panel that's going to give you that destination source take performance that every operator expects. And in that way, we've been able to have systems that are 2110 IP production systems that are maybe operated by freelancers who use an SDI system from one day to the next, and then come in and have no idea that they're essentially operating a data center under the hood.
Right. And that distinction is key because, we all get excited about technology, but in the end, our technology supports creative professionals who create television content or distribute television content. They don't want to know what's under the hood. They want the thing they asked for when they hit the button, and for the timing to be predictable to their fingers. And so that's our key focus, is on delivering that operational experience that's like the plant that they worked in last year.
Yeah, and I think from the examples that we've seen out in the field, you guys have absolutely achieved that. It looks and it feels and it works like a routing system. So the current state of the art, I guess you guys would say, where we are with IP and where we are with 2110, it's working pretty well. It's pretty mature. People are actually using it every day to do production and origination work, right?
Yeah, it's not remarkable to build a 2110 plant. It's really, it's a logical choice, especially if you have requirements that go into the future and might include new technologies.
Well, so let's shift to that, John. Let's talk about some of those new technologies. One of the things that's always been true in the video industry is that evolution of formats, and that, that progression of resolutions and color spaces continues year after year. How is 2110 aligned to be able to support that evolution?
Well, when we were developing 2110, we had great participation from the UHD community and the HDR workflow community and the post houses. And so we built all this stuff into the standard, the expectation that 2110 would be used for 4K and 8K and HDR and wide color gamut. And that's what's borne out in practice. We have facilities around the world that are operating in full res UHD, a few starting to do 8K using 2110.
You're talking a lot about video. What about audio?
Well, the audio industry is a great example of the power of standards and the challenges of not having them sometimes. So the audio industry, everything in television was invented in radio 10 years earlier, right? And that was true with IP as well. The audio industry launched IP-based workflows with all kinds of competing standards and challenges, eventually settled down on AES 67. And that's then when the growth really happened. In 2110, as video people, we said, let's use what the audio guys already developed to do the audio. So SMPTE 2110 audio is AES 67 audio. We built it that way on purpose because the audio industry had already developed an enormous volume of equipment that supported AES 67 and more every day. Using it in the television work case is a little bit different, but not that different. We tend to route the audio with the video in the control system instead of routing it on the same wire all the time. But that's pretty normal. I mean, if you think back to the old days when we had separate AES routers and audio followed video all the time, we just dusted off those features and modernized them and brought them back in.
Put them on the IP platform.
Yep.
This continuous evolution, though, in the past, the way that would have been handled in hardware-based designs is essentially through modular chassis. Is there anything about the way that 2110 has been implemented, or even the way that Imagine's products have been implemented, to better facilitate this continual evolution of the standards?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. We Leach historically, us as Leach, we had modular frames and have modular frames, a little card for this, a little card for that. And those are the workhorse of the industry. And you walk around the machine room of any television facility and you see row after row of these modular frames with purpose-built hardware bits. But as the same technology evolution that allows the computing industry to put, 32 cores on a die also allows us to do 100 gigabit Ethernet, also allows us to package programmable technologies in FPGAs. So what we've done lately is to build products that are really a common hardware platform, but have different personalities loaded by FPGA code and software. So it's like the effect of the modular product where you buy the thing you need for the purpose, but without all those pesky hardware modules. Mm-hmm. Instead, it's an evolution of more and more different software, based features that go onto existing platforms. And you'll see this in our network-based processing family today, that we have, what started out as, SDI IP synchronizers, became color processors, became, LUT-based HDR adapters, became full accuracy pipeline adapters, became multi-viewers even. And we have more and more features in the pipeline that are coming out, but on top of the same hardware platform that's already deployed. It's great for customers, it's great for our factory logistics people, and frankly, it's great for end customers because it's a common scheme, but then you just add features.
So Cassidy, let's pick up on that theme of this being good for customers. Your day job is to design systems that are flexible and scalable and that customers can keep in operations for years and years. How have you and your team been able to leverage this idea of software upgradability and feature extensibility for the benefit of customers?
Yeah, no, it's been huge. To John's point, there's people who actually started out with a processing node that was purely handling an SDI to a 2110 conversion. And then as we got to, say, the HDR capable multi-viewer personality, they were able to just, have a section of that processing node act as that low latency HDR capable multi-viewer. And what it means for some of these large complex systems, especially for major sporting events, is they might actually change the role of that processing node from one event to the next. So almost like what we see with some of these sort of cloud data center systems, it's like having your own, virtualized resources on-prem and then changing, okay, today it's going to be a UHD system, but tomorrow I'm going to go back to being a 3G 1080p system.
Yeah, it really is incredible the amount of flexibility that this move towards IP has given both the product development and the system designers across the industry. As you guys were saying earlier, I think it really is delivering on the benefits of IP in a way that we had envisioned and have finally achieved. So let's take a look towards the future. John, you talked about 4K, you talked about UHD, you talked about AES 67. What are some of the other things that you see on the horizon that are going to be enabled through IP?
Well, the format explosion, UHD is really happening, and it's happening on a world basis. We see a lot of interest in UHD and building out UHD facilities, in Europe, in the Middle East, and Far East. All kinds of work going on in UHD, and starting to be non-trivial work going on in 8K. The 8K looks really fantastic when you see it in person, but of course, it's still a bit spendy for most of us. But it can happen. I think the HDR workflows were just beginning as an industry to really understand the power of HDR and how HDR integrates into productions. You can make really beautiful looking television in HDR. But to your point, where is this all going? We are seeing more and more cloud integration. And so we are rolling out JPEG XS, for example, right now as the on-ramp and off-ramp, so that when we put, say, playout systems in the cloud, we're able to launch live inputs to them, able to collect back the outputs at full production quality. We've also been integrating with production switcher solutions that are software-based and cloudifiable, in the same way that we can either use JPEG XS or RAW 2110 to integrate with things like the Panasonic Kairos.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's a pretty impressive span of technology there. Everything from SDI IP hybrid systems up through the latest video formats, the latest encoding, and even extending all the way up into cloud with some of the work that's being done around JPEG XS. It really does seem like the 2110 suite has given our industry an essential and an impressive suite of capabilities. So I want to thank the two of you for participating today. Great information. Thank you so much for sharing. And we look forward to seeing everybody again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you, everyone.
All that stands between the action here, or here, and seeing it here is the magic of human ingenuity and the power of advanced software solutions. You and your team deliver the joy, the drama, the heart here. and here too. You've shown us what this media landscape can look like when you combine technology with passion, innovation, and a thirst for a perfect viewing experience. Leading media innovators like you inspire us to find better ways to make and monetize TV, to fully embrace the potential of IP for greater agility and faster time to revenue, to develop next-gen ad tech that delivers the best of linear at the speed of digital, and to implement cloud-based solutions that streamline workflows from playout to payout. Every day, we take on diverse projects that range from the routine to the revolutionary, helping you navigate new platforms and deliver the best experience everywhere, every time, without worrying about what's happening behind the curtain. You've always been the magic maker. We just give you the spark.